The wind in Ocotillo Creek did not blow so much as it scoured. It carried the grit of the Arizona Territory, a fine, biting powder that worked its way into the seams of the clapboard houses, into the water barrels, and into the lines of a person's face until they looked as eroded as the mesas to the north. For Clara Miller, the wind was just another hand trying to push her down, another weight to bear alongside the glare of the sun and the eyes of the town. She stood on the porch of the leaning shack her father called a home, wringing out a gray shirt that had been white 3 years ago. Her knuckles were raw, the skin chapped red and splitting in the dry air. Inside, she could hear the heavy, wet snore of her father. Silas passed out on the floor where he had fallen 2 hours prior. The sound was a mercy. When Silas was asleep, he was not drinking. And when he was not drinking, he was not breaking things. May sat on the bottom step, whittling a piece of driftwood with a stolen paring knife. At 18, May was all sharp angles and simmering fury, her dark hair pulled back severely, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if expecting an army. Ruth, only 14, sat beside her, mending a tear in her skirt with careful, trembling fingers. Ruth was the soft one, the one the territory had not yet managed to turn into leather and stone. Clara watched them, the familiar ache of responsibility settling between her shoulder blades. To the people of Ocotillo Creek, they were not Clara, May, and Ruth. They were the Miller girls, the drunkard's daughters, trash that hadn't yet been swept away. Towns on the border were built on hope and violence, but Ocotillo Creek seemed built on judgment. The women in their bonnets, walking to the whitewashed church on Sundays, would pull their skirts aside when Clara passed, as if her poverty were a contagion. They whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes sliding over the bruises Clara tried to hide with high collars. They blamed the daughters for the sins of the father. If Silas Miller owed money to the grocer would look at Clara's waist and suggest a way she might work off the debt. If Silas started a brawl in the saloon, the sheriff would ride out to their shack, not to arrest the man, but to linger on the porch and tell Clara how vulnerable 3 girls were alone out here. It was a hypocrisy that choked them. The town wanted them gone, yet it seemed intent on devouring them first. Clara hung the shirt on the line, the wood groaning under her weight. She saw the dust cloud before she heard the horses. 2 riders were coming up the road from town. She stiffened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Get inside," she said, her voice low. May looked up, eyes narrowing. "Who is it?" "Sheriff Pale, and someone else. Go." Ruth scrambled up immediately, clutching her sewing. But May took her time, stabbing the knife into the wood of the step before standing. They retreated into the gloom of the shack, leaving Clara to stand as the gatekeeper. Sheriff Pale rode a tall bay gelding that looked better fed than half the children in the territory. He was a thick man with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that looked like whetstones. Beside him rode a man Clara did not know, a stranger in a dusting coat, wearing a hat pulled low, with silver spurs that chimed like funeral bells. "Morning, Clara," the sheriff called out, reining in his horse a few yards from the porch. He did not tip his hat. "Sheriff," Clara replied. Her voice was steady, a weapon she had forged over years of talking down angry men. "My father is asleep. Is he now?" Pale chuckled, the sound dry and humorless. "Well, waking him might be a kindness today. I brought Mr. Hurst here to see him. Mr. Hurst has a business proposition that might clear Silas's slate." Clara crossed her arms. "We don't need any propositions. We are managing—" Pale's smile vanished, replaced by a look of flat irritation. "You are starving, Clara, and your father owes nearly every man in Ocotillo Creek. Mr. Hurst is the Indian agent from the reservation up north. He is a generous man. He is looking for labor, domestic help for the agency house. Good, Christian work. The stranger, Hurst, looked at Clara. His gaze was terrifyingly blank, stripping her down to muscle and bone, assessing her worth like a rancher eyeing a heifer. 3 of them, Hurst said. His voice was soft, cultivated, and entirely wrong for the dust and heat. You said there were 3? Clara felt a cold prickle of dread run down her spine. The sheriff wasn't here to collect a debt. He was here to sell it. We are not interested, Clara said, stepping back toward the door. This isn't your choice to make, girl, Pyle said, his voice hardening. It is your father's debt. Wake him up, or I will come in there and wake him myself. Before Clara could answer, the door creaked open. Silas Miller stumbled out, blinking in the harsh light. He smelled of vomit and stale rye. His shirt unbuttoned, his face gray with a hangover. Who is it? Silas croaked, shielding his eyes. It is Salvation. Silas, the sheriff said, his jovial tone returning. Mister, Hurst is here to offer you a way out. $50 for the contracts. Clean slate. Silas blinked, his watery eyes trying to focus on the stranger. 50? For the girl's labor. Hurst said, 2 years. They will be fed and housed. You will have your $50, and your credit in town will be restored. Clara turned to her father, panic rising in her throat like bile. Pa, no, you cannot do this. You know what happens to girls who go to the agency. Silas looked at the $50 Hurst was already holding up, gold coins that glinted in the sun. He looked at Clara, then at the dark doorway where May and Ruth were hiding. He did not look at them with love. He looked at them with the resentment of a man who felt burdened by his own failures. It is just work, Clara, Silas muttered, reaching for the porch railing to steady himself. You girls eat more than you're worth. It is time you paid your way. Pa, please, Clara hissed, grabbing his arm. Her fingers dug into his sleeve. Look at that man. Look at his eyes. They are not taking us to scrub floors. Silas shoved her away, hard enough that she stumbled and hit her shoulder against the doorframe. Shut your mouth, he roared, the sudden rage of the drunkard flaring up. Do you think I want to live like this? Do you think I want to be hounded? You ungrateful bitch. I put a roof over your head, and you begrudge me a chance to breathe? He turned to the men on horses. I will take the money. Done, Hurst said, tossing the small, heavy bag. It landed in the dust at Silas's feet. We will send a wagon at sundown, the sheriff said, tipping his hat to Clara with a mockery of politeness. Have them ready. They turned their horses and rode away, leaving the dust to settle over Clara's shattered world. Silas fell to his knees, scrabbling for the coins, his hands shaking. Clara stood frozen. The heat of the day seemed to vanish, leaving her cold. She looked at her father, a man who had once held her on his shoulders, now groveling in the dirt for the price of his daughter's lives. She went inside. May was standing by the window. The knife gripped so tight her knuckles were white. Ruth was crying silently, her face buried in her hands. Pack, Clara said. Her voice was not her own. It was a stone dropping into a well. May turned. We are leaving. We are leaving. Now. They moved with the desperate efficiency of the hunted. They did not own much. Clara took the sturdy canvas sack and filled it with what food they had. A heel of stale bread, a jar of dried apples, a strip of cured beef. She took the water skins, filling them from the bucket. May grabbed the blanket from her bed and the heavy wool coat Clara had re-sewn 3 times. Ruth, Clara said, crouching in front of her sister. She took Ruth's face in her hands. I need you to be brave. Can you do that? We are going to play a game. We are going to be ghosts, quiet as ghosts. Ruth nodded, sniffing, and wiped her nose on her sleeve. Where are we going? Away, Clara said. She went to the loose floorboard under her cot and pried it up. There, wrapped in an oilcloth, were 4 silver dollars and a handful of copper cents. It was money she had skimmed from the grocery budget for 5 years, a penny at a time. It was supposed to be for a doctor, or a coffin. Now it was for freedom. They waited until the heavy silence of the afternoon nap settled over the house. Silas was still on the porch, counting his gold, muttering to himself. He had already cracked a new bottle. We go out the back, Clara whispered. They slipped through the rear window, dropping into the dry weeds of the yard. The desert stretched out behind the house, a vast ocean of scrub brush and prickly pear leading toward the broken spine of the mountains. They did not look back at the shack. They did not say goodbye to the life that had tried to crush them. They ran. They kept to the low ground, moving through the dry washes where the mesquite grew thick and thorny. The landscape was immediately hostile. The brush tore at their skirts and scratched their arms. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on their heads. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot. By late afternoon, they were miles from town, deep in the rocky foothills. Ruth was limping, her thin boots ill-suited for the jagged stones. May was seething, her energy frantic and angry, while Clara forced them to keep a steady, punishing pace. "We have to keep moving," Clara said, her throat dry. "The wagon comes at sundown. When they find us gone, they will come looking. They won't care." May spat, hacking at a branch with her knife. "Pa has his money. The sheriff took a cut of that money," Clara said grimly. "And that man, Hurst, he didn't pay $50 for housekeepers. They will care. They will come." Night fell like a hammer. The temperature plummeted, the desert trading its furnace heat for a bone-deep chill. They huddled in a shallow depression beneath an overhang of rock, sharing the wool coat. The silence of the wilderness was vast and terrifying. It was not empty silence. It was a listening silence. Coyotes yipped in the distance, a manic, laughing sound that made Ruth shiver. They didn't sleep. They waited for the sun. And with it, the pursuit. It came sooner than Clara expected. Mid-morning found them struggling up a scree slope, trying to reach the higher mesas where horses would struggle. The sound of hoofbeats carried on the wind, echoing off the canyon walls. Clara shoved her sisters behind a cluster of boulders. "Down! Stay down!" She peered through a crack in the rocks. Below them, on the valley floor, 4 men were riding. She recognized the sheriff's bay. They were tracking, moving slowly, their heads down, reading the signs the sisters had inevitably left in the soft sand of the wash. "They are tracking us like deer," May whispered, her face pale. Clara watched as the sheriff stopped and pointed up the slope. He knew. "We have to move," Clara said. "Up, into the rocks." They scrambled upward, lungs burning. The terrain grew steeper, the rocks sharper. They found a narrow goat path that wound along the edge of a canyon, a sheer drop on one side and a wall of red stone on the other. As they rounded a bend, they stumbled upon a scene that stopped them cold. Hidden in a blind box canyon, away from the main trails, was a campsite. But it was not a cowboy camp. There was a heavy wagon with a canvas cover tied down tight. Near the remains of a fire lay a ledger book, forgotten or dropped. And near the wagon, dumped in a pile, were shackles, iron cuffs, small ones, small enough for wrists like Ruth's. Clara walked to the wagon and lifted the corner of the canvas. Inside, it smelled of unwashed bodies and terror. There were tie-downs bolted to the floor. "It's a slaver's wagon." Clara breathed, the horror washing over her. May picked up the ledger from the dirt. It was open to a page of names and numbers. "Clara, look." Clara looked. Sarah, 40. Maria, 60. Miller girls, 50. They weren't just runaways. They were merchandise. The sheriff wasn't just a corrupt lawman. He was part of a pipeline that moved girls across the territory, selling them to mines, to brothels, to places where people vanished. "He sold us," May said, her voice trembling with rage. "Pa sold us to this. We have to go." Ruth whimpered, pulling at Clara's sleeve. "Please, Clara." A rock clattered behind them. Clara spun around, standing at the mouth of the box canyon, blocking their only exit. Were 3 men. They were not the sheriff, but his deputies, hard-faced men with dust on their coats and rifles in their hands. "Well now," one of them grinned, stepping forward. "Look what we found. The sheriff said you were flighty." "Stay back," Clara warned, pushing Ruth behind her. She reached into her skirt pocket and gripped the handle of the dull paring knife. It felt laughably small. "Now, don't be difficult, darlin'," the deputy said, unholstering his revolver but not raising it. "We're just here to bring you back. Your pa is worried sick." "You're lying," Clara said. "We saw the wagon. We saw the chains." The deputy's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went dead. "Well, That's unfortunate. That makes things harder for you. He signaled to the others. Grab them. Don't mark the faces. The men lunged. Run! Clara screamed. But there was nowhere to run. The canyon walls were sheer. The men closed the distance in seconds. One of them grabbed May by the hair. She screamed, slashing out with her knife, cutting his sleeve. He backhanded her, sending her sprawling into the dust. Another man grabbed Ruth, lifting her off her feet as she kicked and wailed. Clara threw herself at him, stabbing with her knife, but the third man caught her wrist, twisting it until the blade dropped. He slammed her back against the wagon wheel, knocking the wind out of her. That's enough, the lead deputy shouted. Tie them up! Clara gasped for air, her vision swimming. She saw May trying to crawl to Ruth. She saw the men pulling ropes from their belts. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. This was the end. They would disappear into this wagon, and no one would ever look for them. Then, the air changed. It wasn't a sound, but a shift in pressure. A shadow detached itself from the high rim of the canyon wall above them. A figure dropped from the sky, landing in a crouch between the deputies and the sisters. He rose in a blur of motion. He was an Apache warrior, stripped to the waist, his chest painted with ash and clay. He moved not like a man, but like water rushing through a broken dam. The deputy holding Ruth shouted, raising his gun. The warrior was faster. He closed the distance, a heavy war club swinging in a brutal arc. There was a sickening crack of wood against bone, and the deputy crumpled, his gun flying into the dirt. The second man, the one who had hit May, fumbled for his holster. The warrior spun, a knife appearing in his hand as if summoned from the air. He didn't throw it, he drove it. He slammed into the man, the knife flashing, and then shoved him away. The deputy fell, clutching his shoulder, screaming. The leader, the one who had cornered Clara, fired a shot. The bullet kicked up dust at the warrior's feet. The Apache didn't flinch. He moved sideways, a jagged, unpredictable sidestep, and then surged forward. He didn't kill the man. He struck him across the face with the flat of the club, a blow that sounded like a thunderclap. The deputy spun and hit the ground, unconscious before he landed. Silence crashed back into the canyon. Louder than the gunshot, the warrior stood amidst the fallen men. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, but his weapon was already lowered. He turned slowly to face the sisters. Clara pressed her back against the wagon wheel, pulling Ruth against her chest. May scrambled backward in the dirt until she hit Clara's leg. They stared at him, paralyzed. He was terrifying. His hair was black and coarse, held back by a strip of red cloth. His face was a map of sharp angles and old scars. He wore buckskin breeches that were stained and worn, and high moccasins that made no sound when he shifted his weight. He looked at them with eyes that were dark, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. He was Taza. Clara knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. He was the ghost the soldiers couldn't catch, the renegade who refused the reservation. To the town, he was a monster who stole children and burned ranches. But looking at him now, Clara didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had just saved them from monsters. Taza looked at the deputies groaning in the dirt, then back at the girls. He sheathed his knife. His gaze lingered on Ruth, shaking in Clara's arms, then moved to May's bleeding lip, and finally settled on Clara's face. He spoke. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. They will wake up. Clara blinked. He spoke English. Not well, but he spoke it. Thank you, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. He didn't acknowledge the thanks. He gestured with his chin toward the open mouth of the canyon. You run, or you go back. We can't go back, May said, her voice shaking but fierce. They will sell us. Taza looked at the wagon, then at the shackles. His expression tightened, a flicker of disgust crossing his face. He spat on the ground near the deputies. Soldiers come, he said. They heard the shot. You stay here. You die. You go to town. You die. He turned and began to walk away, heading toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall that Clara hadn't even seen. "Wait!" Clara called out. She surprised herself. She stood up, her legs trembling. "Wait, we don't know the way. We will die out there." Taza stopped. He looked back over his shoulder. He looked tired. It was a detail Clara hadn't expected. Beneath the war paint and the muscle, there was a profound exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. The leather of his gear was cracked and mended a dozen times. He was a man fighting a war that was already lost. "I do not take you," he said. "I am not a nurse. Please," Clara said. "Just away from them. Just until we are past the patrols. We won't slow you down." Taza looked at the three of them. He saw the city shoes, the heavy skirts, the terror. He saw trouble. But he also saw three women standing shoulder to shoulder against a wall of rock, refusing to break. He let out a short, sharp breath through his nose. "No screaming," he said. "If you scream, I leave you." "We won't scream," Clara promised. He nodded once, sharply. "Then walk." He slipped into the fissure. Clara grabbed the canvas sack. May helped Ruth to her feet. They stepped over the bodies of the men who had tried to own them, leaving the wagon and the ledger and the life they had known behind. They followed the Apache warrior into the jagged shadows of the deep desert, walking away from the false light of Ocotillo Creek and into the honest, brutal dark of the wild. Clara walked last, keeping her sisters between her and Taza. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of their situation set in. They were walking into the wilderness with a man her father had told her was a devil. She watched him move. He favored his left leg slightly. An old injury? He scanned the ridge lines constantly, his head moving with the rhythm of a hawk. He didn't look back to see if they were following. He knew they were. They had no other choice. The sun began to dip, painting the rocks in shades of blood and violet. Clara looked at the back of the warrior's head, at the black hair moving in the wind. She touched the bruise forming on her wrist where the deputy had grabbed her. She realized then that the stories were wrong. The town was the monster. The desert was just the desert. And Taza was just a man who knew how to survive it. She tightened her grip on her sister's hand and walked on. The first thing to die was the shoes. They were boots meant for walking from a porch to a church pew, or from a kitchen to a market stall. They were made of thin calf skin with button hooks and narrow heels, designed for the flat, beaten earth of Ocotillo Creek. They were not made for the Dragoon Mountains. 3 days into the flight, the soles of Ruth's boots had separated from the uppers, flapping like the tongues of dead dogs with every step. Clara had tied them together with strips of rag torn from her petticoat, but the rocks were merciless. The granite slopes shredded the fabric, and soon the leather gave way entirely. Ruth did not complain. That was the worst part. She simply walked, her face gray and slick with sweat, biting her lip until it bled. It was only when they stopped at midday, huddled in the shade of a twisted juniper, that Clara saw the blood soaking through Ruth's stockings. "Let me see," Clara said, kneeling in the grit. "No, it is fine," Ruth whispered, pulling her foot back. Clara took her ankle firmly. "Show me." She peeled away the ruined stocking. The skin of Ruth's heel was gone, replaced by a raw, weeping sore. The ball of her foot was a map of blisters, some broken and infected with the red dust of the high country. Clara felt a surge of nausea, followed instantly by a crushing weight of guilt. She looked up and saw Taza standing a few yards away. He was watching the horizon, his back to them, but Clara knew he heard everything. He seemed to hear the wind changing direction before it happened. He turned slowly, his eyes dropping to Ruth's foot. He did not look sympathetic. He looked calculating. "She cannot walk on that," Taza said. "She has to," May snapped. She was sitting against the tree trunk, sharpening a stick with a dull paring knife, her movements jerky with anger. "Unless you have a carriage tucked away in your pocket." Taza ignored May. He walked to a yucca plant, slicing a thick, fleshy leaf from the base with his knife. He stripped the fibers from it, then cut a piece of tough leather from the fringe of his own leggings. "Clean it with water," Taza ordered Clara. We have little water left, Clara said, guarding the skin. Clean it, or the rot takes the leg. Then she dies. The bluntness of it silenced them. Clara poured a precious cupful of water over Ruth's foot. Ruth gasped, tears leaking from her shut eyes, but she did not scream. Taza knelt beside them. His hands, large and scarred, moved with surprising delicacy. He crushed the yucca pulp and pressed it against the raw skin. A cool, wet poultice, and then bound the foot with the leather strip and the remains of the stocking. It will hold, he said, standing up. But we lose speed. May glared at him. We are going as fast as we can. Taza looked down at her. The men behind us do not care how fast you can go. They care only how fast they can catch you. We move now. May stood up, dusting off her skirt aggressively. Why should we listen to you? You walk us in circles. You take us over the worst rocks. You treat us like mules. Because mules understand when to be quiet, Taza said calmly. May opened her mouth to scream, but Clara stepped between them. Enough! May, stop it! He is helping us. Helping, May laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. He is an Indian. Clara! Pa said they'd scalp us as soon as look at us. How do we know he isn't leading us to his own people to finish what the sheriff started? Because he hasn't done it yet, Clara said, her voice hard. And because without him, we would be in the back of that wagon. Now pick up your pack. They moved on. The landscape grew harsher as they climbed. The air thinned, making their lungs burn. The sun was a hammer by day, beating down on the jagged spine of the ridge. But as soon as the sun dipped below the peaks, the cold rushed in like a floodwater. It was a freezing, biting cold that settled in the marrow of their bones. Taza taught them the rules of the land, and the rules were absolute. Do not gulp, he told them when Clara tipped the water skin too high. Sip, the water must mix with your mouth before it goes to your stomach. If you gulp, you sweat. If you sweat, you die. He taught them how to step. Put your toe down first. Feel the ground, then the heel. If you step flat, you break sticks. Sound carries for miles in the canyons. He taught them to read the sky. See the clouds hooking at the end. Wind comes tomorrow. Big wind. We must be in the shelter of the canyon before it hits. Clara tried to absorb it all, her mind working furiously to categorize the information. She saw the logic in his movements. He was not cruel. She realized he was simply efficient. In Ocotillo Creek, kindness was a social currency, something you traded to be liked. Out here, kindness was keeping someone alive, but the fear was always there, not just of the desert, but of what lay behind them. On the fourth night, they made a dry camp in a shallow depression of rock. They dared not light a fire large enough for warmth, just a small, shielded flame of dry sage twigs to boil a handful of beans. They sat close to the meager heat, their shoulders touching. Why do they want us so bad? Ruth asked. Her voice was thin, childlike. It has been days. Surely Pa has spent the money by now. It isn't Pa, Clara said softly. Stirring the beans. It is the ledger. The book May found? Ruth asked. Clara nodded. We saw names, Ruth, scores of names. The sheriff. He isn't just looking for runaways. He's running a business. If we get away, if we tell anyone what we saw, they hang. May finished, her eyes dark in the firelight. The realization settled over them, heavier than the cold. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was an execution waiting to happen. They could not go back to Ocotillo Creek. They could not go back to any town where the law wore a badge paid for by men like Hearst. Taza was sitting just outside the circle of light, chewing on a strip of dried meat. He offered no comfort. He offered no lies. Sleep, he said. We walk before dawn. Clara wrapped herself in the shared blanket, sandwiched between her sisters. Exhaustion pulled at her, dragging her down, but her mind refused to shut off. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of dry grass sounded like boots. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, Clara woke. The cold had seeped through the blanket. May and Ruth were heavy lumps of sleep beside her. Clara sat up, rubbing her arms. The fire was dead, just a pile of white ash. The moon was high, painting the desert in silver and black. Taza was there. He sat on a boulder 10 feet away, wrapped in his blanket. facing the darkness of the valley below. He was perfectly still. He looked like he had been carved from the rock itself. Clara watched him for a long time. In town, men slept, even the hardest ranch hands. When the work was done, collapsed into heavy, snoring oblivion. But Taza did not slump. His head was high. He was listening. She realized then what his life was. To be Apache in this territory was to be hunted, every hour of every day. He did not rest because the world wanted to break him. She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders, and stepped quietly toward him. Taza did not turn, but he spoke low. "You should sleep. I am cold," Clara said. Taza shifted, making room on the flat rock, though he did not invite her. Clara sat near him, keeping a foot of distance between them. The heat radiating from his body was startling against the freezing air. "Do you ever close your eyes?" she asked. "One at a time," he said. Clara looked at his profile. The moonlight caught the sharp bridge of his nose, the heavy brow. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why help us?" "You hate white people. I see it in your face when you look at the settlements. Hate is a waste of water," Taza said. "It makes you thirsty." That is not an answer. Taza turned to her then. His eyes were black pools, reflecting the moon. "I have a sister. She was taken 2 winters ago. Soldiers." Clara felt the breath catch in her throat. "Is she dead?" He said it without inflection, but the word landed like a stone. "I could not save her," Taza said, looking back at the dark valley. "I save you. It balances nothing, but it is something." Clara looked at his hands, resting on his knees. They were stained with earth and gun oil, but they were steady. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Taza said. "We are not safe." The next day, the heat returned with a vengeance. The wind died, and the air became a stagnant oven. They were crossing a stretch of open scrubland, trying to reach the tree line of the next ridge. Ruth began to stumble. Her face was flushed a deep, unhealthy red. She stopped answering when Clara spoke to her. "Ruth," Clara said, grabbing her arm. "Ruth, look at me." Ruth's eyes rolled back. She buckled at the knees, collapsing into the dust like a marionette with cut strings. "Ruth!" May screamed. Clara fell to her knees, shaking her sister. "Ruth, wake up, please." Taza was there in an instant. He touched Ruth's neck, then lifted her eyelid. "Heat sickness," he said. "She has no water in her blood. We gave her the last of the skin an hour ago," Clara said, panic rising. It was not enough. Taza looked at the ridge ahead. It was still 2 miles away. 2 miles of exposed, baking rock. "She cannot walk," Taza said. "We can carry her," May said, trying to lift Ruth's shoulders. "Clara, take her feet." "We are too slow," Taza said. He pushed May aside, not roughly, but with authority. He slid his arms under Ruth's unconscious body and lifted her. She was small, but dead weight was heavy in the heat. Taza grunted, shifting her so she lay across his chest and shoulder. He looked at Clara. "You carry my pack and the rifle." Clara scrambled to obey, slinging his heavy leather pack over one shoulder and taking the Winchester. The metal of the gun barrel was hot enough to blister her hand. They moved. Taza's pace slowed, his breathing becoming a rhythmic rasp. Sweat soaked his shirt, turning the buckskin dark. Clara watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was carrying her sister, risking his own survival, risking capture. Her pride, usually a fortress, crumbled. She hated that she was weak. She hated that she needed him. But as she watched the muscles in his back strain under the weight, the hate dissolved into something else, a fierce, terrifying gratitude. They made the tree line an hour later. Taza laid Ruth down in the shade of a pine. He collapsed beside her, leaning his head back against the bark, his chest heaving. Clara wet a rag with the dregs of the water and pressed it to Ruth's forehead. After a few minutes, Ruth groaned and opened her eyes. "I'm sorry," Ruth whispered, her voice a dry croak. "Quiet." Clara hushed her. "Just rest." Taza sat up, wiping sweat from his eyes. He reached for the rifle Clara had leaned against the tree. He checked the action, then looked out the way they had come. "Did we lose them?" May asked, her voice less sharp than usual. Taza shook his head. "No, the extra time. They are closer. We left deep tracks with the weight. They will read them like a book." He stood up, ignoring his own exhaustion. "We moved deeper, into the canyons. There is water there, and cover." As they pushed deeper into the mountains, the signs of the world changed. It wasn't just the wilderness anymore. It was a battlefield. They crossed a meadow where the grass had been burned black, the scorch marks wide and unnatural. Taza skirted the edge of it, his hand hovering near his knife. "Soldiers," he muttered. "They burn the feed so our horses starve." Later, they found a campsite. It was empty, but scattered on the ground were brass cartridge casings. Taza picked one up, turning it in his fingers. "Government issue," he said. "They are patrolling the passes." He looked at the sisters. "We are between the hammer and the anvil. The sheriff behind. The army ahead." "Why is the army here?" Clara asked. "Because we are here," Taza said. "They want to put us in the cages, the reservations, where the ground grows nothing and the water smells of sickness." He led them through a narrow defile, moving with extreme caution. Suddenly, he stopped, holding up a hand. "Down!" he hissed. They dropped into the sagebrush. Taza pointed toward a clearing below them, about 300 yards away. A small group of Apache were gathered there, maybe 10 of them. They were ragged, their clothes torn, their horses thin. They were standing around a pile of stones, a fresh cairn. There was no wailing, no loud cries, just a low, haunting song that drifted up on the wind. A woman stood by the stones, cutting her hair short with a knife. "What are they doing?" Ruth whispered. "Burial," Taza said softly. "Did the soldiers kill him?" May asked. "Maybe soldiers, maybe hunger, maybe the winter." Taza watched them, his face filled with a sorrow so deep it looked like physical pain. "Are they your family?" Clara asked. Taza watched the woman drop her hair onto the stones. "All our family now. There are so few of us left." The sisters watched in silence. They had been raised on stories of bloodthirsty savages, of monsters who killed for sport. But there was no monster in that clearing. There was only grief. It was a human sorrow, raw and recognizable. Clara thought of her own mother's funeral, the hollow ache in her chest. She looked at Taza. He wasn't watching the burial anymore. He was scanning the ridges above the mourners, checking for soldiers, guarding them from a distance, even though he could not join them. He turned to Clara, catching her stare. She didn't look away. For the first time, she let him see her. Not the guarded, defensive woman, but the person underneath. "We should go," Taza said, his voice rough, "before we bring trouble to them." The tension between them shifted after that. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, humming in the air like a telegraph wire. When they stopped to rest, Clara found herself watching his hands. She noticed the way he tied knots, the efficiency of his fingers. She noticed the way he stood, always balanced, always ready. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was an awareness of him as a man, and he watched her. She caught him looking when she adjusted her skirt or wiped sweat from her neck. He saw her resolve. He saw that she didn't weep when the thorns tore her skin. It was late afternoon when the second attack came. They were navigating a dry creek bed, the walls rising 10 feet on either side. It was a natural trap, and Taza had hesitated before entering, but they needed the cover. The shot cracked from the rim above, kicking up sand inches from May's foot. "Run!" Taza roared. He shoved Clara forward, spinning around to face the rim. 3 men appeared on the ridge, dusting coats, Winchesters, the traffickers. They had ridden hard to catch up. "There they are," one shouted. "Shoot the buck, take the girls." Taza raised his rifle and fired. One of the men on the ridge ducked, cursing. "Go!" Taza yelled at the sisters. "The bend! Get around the bend!" Clara grabbed Ruth and dragged her. May was sprinting ahead. More shots rang out. Bullets whined off the rocks, sending stone splinters flying. Taza didn't run. He stood his ground in the open creek bed, working the lever of his rifle. He was buying them seconds. He fired again, and a man on the ridge screamed and fell back, but there were too many angles. A shot hit Taza. Clara heard the impact, a wet thud. Taza jerked back, spinning halfway around, but he didn't fall. He dropped to one knee, fired one last covering shot that sent the remaining attackers scrambling for cover, and then pushed himself up. "Clara!" he yelled, his voice strained. Clara stopped. She looked back. Taza was stumbling toward them, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. She didn't think. She ran back to him. "Clara! No!" May screamed from the bend. Clara reached Taza, grabbing his arm, pulling his weight onto her shoulder. He was heavy, burning with heat. "Move!" he gritted out. Together, they stumbled around the bend of the creek, out of the line of fire. They scrambled up a narrow game trail that led into a cluster of tumbled boulders, finding a shallow cave, little more than a hollow beneath a massive slab of sandstone. They collapsed inside, sliding to the back of the shadows. Outside, the men were shouting to each other, cautious, not wanting to walk into Taza's sights. "Check the ridge, get above them, inside the cave." The silence was heavy with breathing and the smell of copper. Taza leaned back against the stone, his face gray. His hand was clamped over his ribs on the left side. Blood was pooling on the sand floor. "Let me see," Clara said. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was commanded. "It is nothing." Taza winced, trying to push her away. "Don't lie to me," Clara said fiercely. "Move your hand." She pried his fingers away. The bullet had grazed the ribs, tearing a deep, jagged furrow through the muscle. It wasn't a gut shot, thank God, but it was bleeding heavily. "We need to stop the blood," Clara said. She looked at her skirt. It was already ruined. She gripped the hem of her petticoat and ripped a long, wide strip of white cotton. "May, hold the rifle," Clara ordered without looking back. "Watch the entrance." Clara knelt between Taza's legs, pressing the cloth against the wound. Taza hissed, his head tipping back against the rock, his teeth clenched. "I am sorry," Clara whispered. "This will hurt." She pressed harder. Taza's hand came up and gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging in tight. He didn't cry out. He just breathed, short, sharp breaths. Clara looked at his face. His eyes were squeezed shut, sweat beading on his forehead. She was so close to him she could smell the sage smoke in his hair, the salt of his skin, and the iron scent of his blood. He had stood. He could have run into the rocks and vanished. He was a ghost. He could have left them to be taken. But he stood. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why did you stay?" Taza opened his eyes. They were dark and glazed with pain, but focused on her. "Because you," he gritted his teeth, "fighting a wave of pain because you are not merchandise." Clara felt a crack in the center of her chest, a breaking of the dam she had built to keep the world out. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. She leaned closer, securing the bandage, her hands lingering on his chest. "Thank you," she breathed. It wasn't the polite thanks of the town. It was a confession. Taza looked at her. His grip on her shoulder softened, his thumb brushing the hollow of her collarbone. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, but it burned like a brand. "They are coming," May hissed from the cave mouth. "I hear them on the gravel." Clara pulled back, wiping her face. She picked up Taza's knife from where it had fallen. She placed it in his hand, then picked up a heavy stone for herself. "We are not done yet," Clara said. Taza nodded slowly, his eyes clearing. "No, not done." They waited in the dim light of the cave, the sun setting outside, turning the rocks to blood. The hunters were closing in. The cold was returning, and Taza's blood was on Clara's hands. But as she sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder against the stone, Clara knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let them take him. Not now, not ever. The wind coming off the high mesas had teeth now. It was no longer just the dry rasp of the desert. It carried the metallic taste of coming snow. They had been moving for 8 days since the cave. pushing north and east toward the jagged spine of the mountains where the territory folded in on itself, a place where the law became a suggestion rather than a rule. Taza was slowing down. Clara watched him from a few paces back. He still walked with that fluid, silent grace, but there was a hitch in his stride on the left side, a subtle hesitation before he put weight on his hip. The bandage she had wrapped around his ribs was stiff with dried blood and sweat, and though he never made a sound, the gray pallor of his skin under the desert dust told her the wound was hot. "We need supplies," Clara said, her voice cracking from dehydration. She moved up to walk beside him. "You need fresh cloth, salve. We are out of beans." Taza didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the ridge line. "There is a place, San Rafael. It is not a town. It is a scab on the land. Traders, drifters, men who do not want to be found. Is it safe?" Ruth asked from behind. Her voice had changed in the last week. The whine was gone, replaced by a flat, hollow tone that unsettled Clara. "Nowhere is safe," Taza said. "But the army does not go there often. The people there, they do not like uniforms." They reached the outskirts of San Rafael at dusk. It was a miserable collection of adobe structures and canvas tents clustered around a muddy watering hole. The air smelled of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the copper tang of butchered meat. "We cannot walk in together," Taza said, pulling them into the shadow of a mesquite thicket. "If they see an Apache with 3 white women, they will shoot first and ask nothing." "I will go," Clara said. "No," May cut in. She dropped her pack, her face smeared with dirt, her eyes bright with a feverish intensity. "You are too soft. Clara, you will try to be polite. I will go. I can steal what we need." "You will not steal," Clara said sharply, grabbing May's wrist. "We are not thieves. If you get caught, we are all dead. I will go. I have the silver coins. I go with you," Taza said. "You can't," Clara argued. "You said yourself, I do not walk down the street." Taza interrupted. "I circle. I watch. If trouble starts, I end it." He looked at Ruth. "You stay here. Keep the knife ready. If anyone comes into the brush, I know." Ruth said. She pulled the dull paring knife from her sash. She didn't hold it like a girl peeling apples anymore. She held it point out, thumb along the spine, just as Taza had shown her. "I aim for the neck." Taza nodded once, a grim approval. Clara and May walked into the settlement, pulling their shawls tight over their heads to hide their faces. San Rafael was a place of shadows. Men sat on crates, drinking from tin cups, their eyes following the sisters with predatory laziness. A dog with 3 legs limped across the mud. They found a mercantile store, a low building with a leaning porch. The sign above the door was faded to illegibility. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of tobacco. The shelves were sparsely stocked, sacks of cornmeal, tins of coffee, bolts of rough calico. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as weathered as the building. He was older, with skin the color of cured tobacco and a thick gray mustache. He was cleaning a lamp chimney with a rag. He looked up as they entered. His eyes were dark and sharp, but they didn't hold the leering hunger Clara was used to seeing in Ocotillo Creek. They held a weary recognition. "We need cornmeal," Clara said, keeping her head down, "and cloth, clean cotton, and carbolic salve. If you have it." The man watched them for a long moment. He put the lamp chimney down. "You are the Miller girls." He said. It wasn't a question. Clara froze. May's hand went to her pocket, where she had hidden a jagged rock. The man raised his hand slowly, palms open. "I am not the law. My name is Elias Thorne. How do you know us?" Clara asked, her heart hammering. Elias reached under the counter. Clara flinched, expecting a shotgun, but he pulled out a piece of paper. He slid it across the wood. It was a wanted poster. The ink was fresh. Wanted for murder and theft. The Miller sisters, and the renegade Apache known as Taza. $500 reward. 500, May breathed, looking at the number. "Pa never saw $500 in his life." "They say you killed 2 deputies, Elias said, watching them closely. "They say the Indian butchered them and kidnapped you. That is the story the sheriff is telling." It is a lie. May spat. The sheriff sold us. He sold us to a slaver. Taza saved us. Elias nodded slowly. I believe you. Clara looked at him, confused. Why? Why would you believe us? Because Sheriff Pyle has been selling girls out of this territory for 5 years, Elias said. His voice was low, vibrating with a suppressed anger. 2 years ago, my niece went to work in Ocotillo Creek. She never came back. Pyle said she ran off with a cowboy. He looked at the poster, then tore it in half. I have the salve, Elias said. And I have dried beef. Better than cornmeal for the road. He moved around the counter, gathering supplies. He didn't ask for the silver. He packed a burlap sack with efficiency. Coffee, sugar, a small bottle of whiskey for the wound, and a box of cartridges. Take this, he said, shoving the sack across the counter. We can pay, Clara said, reaching for her coins. Keep your silver, Elias said. You will need it. But listen to me. There is a man here tonight, a courier. He rides for the Indian agent, Hearst. He is drinking at the cantina now. He has a saddlebag full of papers. May looked up sharply. Papers? Elias leaned in. Hearst runs the contracts. If you want to stop running, you need to know where the road ends. The courier leaves at dawn. The door opened, and a group of miners stumbled in, loud and drunk. Clara grabbed the sack. Go out the back, Elias whispered. God go with you. They slipped out the rear door into the alley. The cold air hit them like a slap. We have to find Taza, Clara said, clutching the sack. No, May said. She was looking toward the cantina, where yellow light spilled onto the mud. Elias said the courier is there. May, no, it is too dangerous. We are already dead. Clara, May hissed. Look at the poster. They are hanging us for murder. We need proof. If we have Hearst's papers, we can go to the marshal in Tucson. We can prove Pal is a liar. Before Clara could stop her, May darted into the shadows, moving toward the hitching rail outside the cantina. May, Clara whispered, but her sister was gone. Clara stood in the alley, torn. She couldn't leave May, but she couldn't leave Ruth alone in the desert either. A hand clamped over her mouth. She gasped, trashing, but the grip was iron. She was pulled back into the darkness of a stable overhang. Quiet. Taza's voice rumbled in her ear. Clara slumped against him, the adrenaline draining out of her. You scared me. You were standing in the light, Taza said. He released her, but he didn't step away. He was leaning heavily against a support post. I saw May. She is hunting. She is foolish, Clara said. She is going after a courier's bags. She is angry, Taza corrected. Anger makes you brave before it makes you smart. They waited in the shadows. The sounds of the cantina drifted over. Shouting, a tinny piano, the crash of glass. Minutes stretched into an hour. Clara could feel the heat radiating from Taza's body, feverish and intense. Finally, a figure sprinted from the gloom. May slid into the alley, breathing hard. A leather satchel clutched to her chest. I got it, she gasped, her eyes wide with triumph and terror. He was drunk. He didn't even see me. Go, Taza said. Now. They made it back to the mesquite thicket without being seen. Ruth was waiting, crouched exactly where they had left her, the knife in her hand. She didn't look relieved to see them. She just looked at their hands to see if they had food. We have to move, Taza said. We can't hide tonight. They climbed until their lungs burned, putting miles of vertical rock between them and the settlement. They found shelter in a wind-scoured depression near the snow line. It was bitterly cold, but safe from prying eyes. Clara opened the sack Elias had given them. She handed out strips of dried beef and opened the whiskey. Taza, she said, the shirt. He hesitated, then nodded. He sat on a flat stone and unbuttoned his shirt. The fabric was stuck to the wound. Clara poured a little whiskey on the cloth to loosen it. Taza hissed, his stomach muscles seizing, but he stayed still. She peeled the fabric back. The wound was angry, the edges red and swollen. May sat by the small fire they had shielded with rocks, tearing into the courier's satchel. Ruth watched her, chewing on the beef with mechanical rhythm. Look at this, May whispered. She held up a ledger. It was identical to the one they had seen in the slaver's wagon. It lists everything, May said, her voice trembling. Dates, prices, drop-off points. Payment to Sheriff Pale, $200. Payment to Sergeant Miller, $100. Sergeant Miller? Ruth asked. That isn't Pa. No, Taza said. His voice was rough. He was watching Clara clean the wound, his eyes dark with pain. Sergeant Miller is the supply officer at the fort. He reports to Hearst. It's a ring, Clara said. Applying the carbolic salve. It isn't just the town. It's the army. It's the agency. She wrapped the clean cotton around Taza's chest, pulling it tight. His skin was hot under her fingers. The physical intimacy of it, the act of touching him, of caring for the body that was standing between her and death, felt suddenly overwhelming. She tied the knot and sat back. Taza caught her hand. His grip was calloused and warm. He looked at the bandage, then up at her face. You have good hands, he said. Clara felt a flush rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. I learned to stitch mending trousers. This is not trousers, Taza said softly. He didn't let go of her hand. The silence between them deepened, charged with everything they hadn't said for days. The fear, the exhaustion, the strange, terrifying bond that had formed in the crucible of their flight. Clara looked at his mouth. It was a stern mouth, unused to smiling, but there was a softness there now. She felt a pull, a magnetic gravity dragging her toward him. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to press her forehead against his chest and forget, for just 1 second, that the world was trying to kill them. Taza leaned in. Just an inch. His eyes searched hers, asking a question he didn't have words for. It would be so easy. Clara thought, to kiss him, to claim this one thing for herself. But then the image of the wanted poster flashed in her mind, the Miller sisters and the renegade Apache. She pulled her hand away, scrambling backward. I can't, she whispered. Taza didn't move. He didn't look angry. He looked resigned. You are afraid. He said, yes, Clara admitted, her voice shaking. I am afraid. If we... It gives them something else to take. I have nothing left to lose. Taza, I cannot lose this too. You think not touching keeps you safe? Taza asked. You think if you stand apart, the bullet misses? I think if I stand apart, I can think, Clara said, and I need to think. She stood up and walked to the edge of the camp, staring out at the dark abyss of the canyon. Her heart was racing so fast it made her dizzy. She wanted him. God, she wanted him. Not as a rescuer, not as a guide, but as a man, and that terrified her more than the sheriff ever could. May came up beside her, clutching the ledger. Clara, she said, look at the date. Clara wiped her eyes and looked at the page May was pointing to. December 12th, delivery to San Miguel Mine. 4 units, that is in 2 days. May said, San Miguel is north of here. So? Clara asked. So, look at the next line. Source, Ocotillo Creek. They are taking more girls, May said, from our town. Clara felt the cold settle deep in her stomach. They weren't just fugitives anymore. They were witnesses to an ongoing crime. The next morning, the sky was the color of bruised iron. Snow was falling in lazy, drifting flakes. They packed in silence. Taza seemed stronger after the food and the dressing, but his mood was dark. He led them along a narrow goat path, higher into the peaks. They stopped at midday to rest. Taza climbed a pinnacle of rock to scout the back trail. When he came down, his face was grim. Smoke, he said, 5 miles back. A big fire. A camp? Clara asked. No, Taza said, a signal. They pushed on. By afternoon, they found out what the signal meant. They came across a trapper's shack nailed to a tree near a stream. It was abandoned, but nailed to the door was another poster. This one was larger. It showed a crude drawing of Taza's face. Murderer. It read, Savage attack in San Rafael. Shopkeeper Elias Thorne brutally killed by Apache renegade. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. No, he helped us, Ruth whispered. She walked up to the poster, touching the paper. He gave us beef. They killed him, May said. her voice rising in fury. "They killed him because he spoke to us, and they are blaming Taza." Taza stared at the paper. He didn't blink. He didn't look surprised. "This is the way," he said quietly. "They kill the white man who helps the Indian. Then they blame the Indian. It makes the hate burn hotter. They will hunt you down like a dog now," May said. "Every man with a gun will be looking for you." They were already looking. Taza said, "No," Clara said. "This is different. They are turning the whole territory against you. They are making you into a monster, so no one will ask questions about the girls." She turned to Taza. "You have to leave us." Taza looked at her, his brows drawing together. "What?" "You have to go," Clara said, stepping close to him. "Go deep into the mountains. Go where they cannot follow. If you stay with us, you die." "And you?" Taza asked. We will go to the marshal. We have the ledger. You will never reach the marshal," Taza said flatly. "The sheriff's men are tracking us. If I leave, they catch you in a day. And then you disappear." "I don't care," Clara shouted. She shoved his chest. "I don't care if I disappear. I cannot watch you hang for something you didn't do. I cannot have Elias's blood on my hands and yours too." Taza grabbed her wrists. He held her fast, forcing her to look at him. "You do not decide my life, Clara. I choose." He pulled her closer, ignoring May and Ruth. "I chose to step into that canyon," he said intensely. "I chose to carry your sister. I choose to stand here. Do not insult me by trying to save me." Clara trembled in his grip. The snow was falling harder now, dusting his black hair with white. "They are lying about you," she whispered. "They have lied about me since the day I was born." Taza said, "It changes nothing." He let her go. "We have a choice," Taza said to the group. "We run west into the deep snow. We freeze. Maybe. We starve. Maybe. But we live free for a little longer. Or what?" May asked. "Or we go to San Miguel," Taza said. "The mine?" Clara asked. "The delivery is tomorrow," Taza said. "If we stop the wagon, if we free the girls, then we have witnesses. Not just 3 runaways. A dozen. It is suicide," Clara said. "It is an ambush. It is war." Taza said. He looked at Clara. His eyes were challenging her. He was offering her a way out of the victimhood, a way to stop running. Clara looked at her sisters. Ruth was holding her knife, her thumb rubbing the blade. May was clutching the ledger like a Bible. They were not the girls who had sat on the porch in Ocotillo Creek. They were something else, something forged in the fire. And she looked at Taza. She saw the man who had slept with one eye open to keep them safe. She saw the man she had almost kissed. She realized then that she didn't want him to leave. She wanted to stand beside him. She took a deep breath. The cold air filled her lungs, sharp and clear. "We don't run," Clara said. May looked at her, surprised. "We fight. We fight," Clara said. She turned to Taza. "Take us to San Miguel." Taza nodded slowly. A corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile, but a grimace of respect. "Check your weapons," he said. Ruth sheathed her knife. May picked up a heavy rock she had been carrying since the creek. Clara tightened the straps of her pack. As they began to move, Clara walked beside Taza. Their shoulders brushed. This time, she didn't pull away. "I am not doing this to save you," she lied quietly. "I know." Taza lied back. But as they walked into the teeth of the storm, Clara admitted the truth to herself. She wasn't fighting for justice. She wasn't fighting for the ledger. She was fighting for him. She wanted a life where she didn't have to look at a wanted poster to see his face. She wanted a life where she could hold his hand without fear. And if she had to burn the whole corrupt territory down to get it, she would. The winter came down from the peaks like a falling curtain of iron. It was not a gradual cooling, but a sudden, violent seizure of the land. The wind shrieked through the canyons, stripping the last dried leaves from the cottonwoods and driving snow into drifts that could swallow a horse to the stirrups. The sound of the cold was a physical thing, the sharp, pistol-crack report of pine trees snapping under the weight of ice in the dark. They had been moving for weeks, pushing deeper into the wildest country to avoid the patrols that now seemed to scour every valley. Their supplies were dangerously thin. The dried beef Elias had given them was gone, replaced by whatever meager game Taza could bring down: a stringy jackrabbit, a wood rat, once a lean deer that they ate down to the marrow. Hunger changed people. It pared them down to their essential nature. For May, hunger was fuel. She became the eyes of the group. She discarded her heavy skirts for a pair of trousers taken from a dead prospector they had found frozen in a drift, binding the waist with rope. She moved ahead of them, climbing high ridges to scan for the dust of cavalry columns. She learned to read the flight of birds and the behavior of deer. She was reckless, fueled by a simmering rage at the world that hunted them, but she was sharp. Ruth, the sister who had once cried over a blister, found a core of quiet iron. She became the keeper of their endurance when the fire would not light. It was Ruth who sheltered the spark with her body for an hour until the damp wood caught, when Taza's wound wept in the cold. It was Ruth who boiled the water and washed the linen, her hands red and chapped but steady. She did not speak much, but she did not stop, and Clara became the spine. She held the group together with a sheer force of will. She calculated the miles, rationed the food to the ounce, and made the hard decisions that Taza, in his solitary nature, sometimes overlooked. She navigated the tempers that flared when the wind howled and stomachs rumbled. "Stop looking at me like that," May snapped one evening, throwing a stick into the paltry fire. "I am looking at the wood," Clara said calmly, not looking up from the mending she was doing by firelight. "We need to conserve it." "You look at me like I am a child," May said, her voice thin with exhaustion. "I found the water today. I found the trail." "And you did well," Clara said. "But if you burn all the wood now, we freeze before dawn. Put the stick back." May glared, her hand tightening on the wood, but she put it back. Taza watched from the shadows, his dark eyes moving between the sisters. He said nothing, but he saw everything. He saw that they were no longer the terrified girls he had pulled from the slaver's wagon. They were becoming creatures of the wild, hardened by the same wind that weathered the stone. "We are not alone here," Taza said suddenly, breaking the silence. Clara looked up. "What?" Taza nodded toward the dark tree line to the north. "There are scouts watching us. Soldiers," Ruth whispered, reaching for her knife. "No," Taza said. "My people. The camp was not a place of war drums and glory. It was a place of hiding." Taza led them into a deep, narrow canyon where the smoke from fires could disperse through a network of fissures before reaching the sky. There were perhaps 30 people. Taza had called them a camp, but to Clara, it looked like the remnants of a shipwreck. There were old men with faces like dried leather, women with eyes that held too much memory, and children who did not play but sat quietly, wrapping themselves in tattered blankets. When Taza rode in, leading the sisters, the silence was absolute. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. The hostility was a physical wave, colder than the wind. Taza dismounted and spoke to a tall, elderly man who stood near the largest fire. They spoke in the Apache tongue, the words flowing like water over rocks, sharp, guttural, rhythmic. Clara did not need to understand the language to understand the tone. The old man gestured angrily at the sisters. He pointed to the sky, to the south, miming the blue coats of the soldiers. He spat on the ground. Taza stood his ground, his voice low and firm. He gestured to Clara, May, and Ruth. He made a sign of cutting, a sign of sharing food. Finally, the old man turned his back and walked away. "We can stay," Taza said, turning to them, "but only for 2 days. They are afraid. They hate us," May muttered, looking at a woman who was glaring at her with open loathing. "They fear you," Taza corrected. "To them, you are death. You are the white world coming to eat them. Every white face they see brings soldiers." Clara straightened her spine. She stepped forward, past Taza, and looked the glaring woman in the eye. She did not lower her head. She did not apologize for existing. "We are hungry," Clara said clearly. We are cold, and we are hunted by the same men who hunt you." The woman did not understand the English, but she understood the defiance. She looked at Clara's hands, scarred and dirty. She looked at the worn boots and the thin, patched coat. The hate in her eyes did not vanish, but it dimmed into a wary suspicion. Clara took the last of their coffee from her pack, a small tin, half full, and held it out. It was a peace offering. It was a bribe. It was survival. The woman hesitated, then stepped forward and took the tin. She pointed to a patch of hard ground near the canyon wall. "Sit," the woman grunted in broken Spanish. They sat. The prejudice was a wall they had to climb every hour. The Apache saw them as a danger. The few times they had spotted settlers or trappers from a distance on the trail, those white faces had looked at the sisters with equal disgust. To the settlers, they were tainted, women who ran with a savage, women who had surely been despoiled and were no longer fit for decent society. Clara realized with a bitter clarity that there was no civilization left for them. They were too wild for the town and too white for the tribe. They stood on a razor's edge, balancing between two worlds that both wanted them dead. But in the camp, amidst the suspicion, there were cracks of humanity. Ruth, with her gentle hands, helped a young mother soothe a colicky baby. She didn't speak, just hummed a lullaby her mother had taught her. The Apache woman watched her like a hawk, ready to strike. But when the baby settled, the woman offered Ruth a piece of flatbread. May, restless and angry, sat with the young men who were sharpening arrows. She pulled out her own knife. The blade honed to a razor edge and began to work on a piece of ash wood. They watched her technique, sneering at first, then nodding with grudging respect when she produced a perfectly balanced shaft. And Clara watched Taza. He was different here. He was not just the warrior or the guide. He was a son. He was a brother to people who were not his blood but were his kin in suffering. She saw him lift a heavy pack for an elder. She saw him touch the shoulder of a grieving man. She saw the exhaustion in him that he never showed on the trail. He came to her on the second night. The cold was vicious, the stars hard and bright as diamonds. Clara was gathering firewood at the edge of the camp, her breath pluming in the air. "You work too hard," Taza said, appearing silently beside her. "If I do not work, I freeze," Clara said, breaking a branch over her knee. "And if I do not work, your people will throw us out." "They will not throw you out," Taza said. "I would not let them?" Clara looked at him. The moonlight cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting the harsh angles of his cheekbones. "You risk everything for us," she said. "Why? You could be safe here. You could disappear with them." "Safe?" Taza let out a short, humorless laugh. "There is no safe. There is only alive or dead. These people, they are running to the end of the world. I am just walking with them for a while." Clara dropped the wood. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering not just from the cold. "My father," she began, the words tumbling out before she could check them. "He didn't just sell us. He hated us." Taza waited. He did not interrupt. He stood like a tree, offering shelter just by being there. "He hated us because we were the only things he couldn't drink." Clara whispered, "He used to look at me, not like a father, like I was a debt he had to pay. And the town, the sheriff, the grocer. They knew, they all knew, they saw the bruises. They saw the hunger." She looked up at Taza, her eyes burning. "I learned to be dead. Taza, I learned to shut off the parts of me that felt pain. I learned to be polite while they stared at me like I was meat. I survived by being nothing." She took a step closer to him. "But out here, with you, I cannot be nothing. You make me feel everything, and it terrifies me." Taza looked at her. He didn't offer empty comforts. He didn't tell her it would be all right. He reached out and took her face in his hands. His palms were rough, warm, and incredibly gentle. "You are not nothing," he said. His voice was a low rumble in the quiet night. "You are the storm. You are the rock. You are the woman who walked into the winter when others would have laid down and died." He brushed his thumb over her cheekbone. "Do not hide from me. Clara, I see you." The touch broke her. The dam she had built for years, the walls of calculation and cold reserve, shattered. She let out a sob that was half-gasp, leaning her face into his hands. She reached up and gripped his wrists. She didn't pull him closer, and she didn't push him away. She just held on, anchoring herself to him. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be safe." "Then we learn," Taza said. He led her back not to the main fire, but to a small shelter he had constructed of bent saplings and hides near the canyon wall. It was small, intimate, removed from the prying eyes of the camp. Inside, it was dark and smelled of pine boughs and leather. They sat on the furs, the space so small their knees touched. The cold outside was a living thing, prowling the perimeter, but inside there was heat. Taza unbuckled his gun belt and set it aside. Clara unpinned her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. It was an act of vulnerability that felt louder than a scream. They lay down together under the heavy buffalo robe. They did not undress. The clothes were armor they couldn't quite shed yet, but they lay close, body against body, seeking warmth. Clara felt the solid thrum of his heart against her back. She felt the rise and fall of his chest. Taza's arm came over her, pulling her tight against him. His hand rested on her stomach, flat and heavy and protective. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her skin. It wasn't a ravaging. It wasn't the hungry. Taking touch she had learned to fear from the men in town. It was a giving. Clara turned in his arms, facing him in the dark. She couldn't see his eyes, but she could feel his breath on her lips. She reached out and traced the line of his jaw, the scar on his shoulder. He trembled under her touch. This warrior, this man who killed without blinking, trembled because she touched him with kindness. "Clara," he breathed. She pressed her forehead to his. "Don't speak, just be here." They lay in the silence, hands exploring with a reverence that bordered on worship, a thumb brushing a wrist, fingers tangled in hair, the friction of rough fabric against skin. It was a reclaiming. Clara felt herself thawing, the ice in her soul melting into a terrifying, beautiful river of want. She wanted him to know her. She wanted to belong to him, not as property, but as a partner in the void. She fell asleep with his hand holding hers against his chest, and for the first time in her life, she did not dream of running. Morning brought the world back with a vengeance. The camp was in chaos before the sun cleared the canyon rim. Shouts echoed off the walls. Dogs barked. The sound of panic, a frequency Clara knew well, vibrated in the air. Taza was up instantly, gun in hand, moving to the flap of the shelter. Clara scrambled up, grabbing her coat. "What is it?" she asked. "Soldiers," Taza said, his face hardening into the mask of the warrior. They emerged into the light. The old man Taza had spoken to was shouting, pointing toward the canyon entrance. "Scouts!" the old man yelled. "Bluecoats! They are 2 miles out! They have the big guns on wheels!" Taza swore, a harsh word in his own tongue. May and Ruth ran to them. May was breathless, her face pale. "I saw them," May gasped. "I went up to the rim at dawn. It's a whole column, cavalry, and there is a man in a black coat with them." "Hurst," Clara said, the name tasting like bile. "He has a megaphone," May said. "He is calling out. He says they are here for the captives. He says the savages have kidnapped white women, and if they do not surrender us, the army will burn the canyon to ash." The camp turned its eyes to the sisters. The fear had curdled into blame. "They bring death," a woman screamed, pointing at Clara. "Give them back." Taza stepped in front of Clara. "Silence," he roared. The old man stepped forward. "Taza, you know the law. We cannot fight the wagon guns. We have children here. If we give them the women, the soldiers might leave." "They will not leave," Taza said. "Hurst does not want the women. He wants to kill you. He uses the women as the excuse. If you give them up, he will slaughter you anyway to hide his crimes." The old man hesitated. The logic was sound, but the fear was stronger. "We must run," Taza said. "Scatter. Up the goat trails. The horses cannot follow there. I will draw them off, May said suddenly. No, Clara shouted. May, you will not. I can do it, May said, her eyes wild with adrenaline. I know the lower trails. If I show myself, if I run toward the south ridge, they will follow me. It will buy the camp time to move north. It is suicide, Taza said. It is survival, May argued. She didn't wait for permission. She turned and sprinted toward the horses. May! Clara screamed, lunging forward, but Taza caught her arm. Wait, he said. Look! May had vaulted onto Taza's horse. She kicked the animal into a gallop, riding not away from the danger, but parallel to the canyon mouth, screaming at the top of her lungs to draw attention. From the distance, a bugle sounded. The trap snapped shut. Gunfire erupted from the rim, not the canyon mouth, but the high ground. The soldiers had flanked them. May's horse screamed and went down. May was thrown, rolling in the dust. Clara watched in horror as dark shapes, men in uniform, swarmed from the rocks. They grabbed May. She fought, kicking and biting, but a rifle butt descended on her head. She went limp. They dragged her away, up toward the ridge. Ruth screamed, a high, thin sound that pierced the noise of the panic. Clara felt a cold rage wash over her, drowning out the fear. She reached for the rifle Taza had given her. I am going to kill them, she said. Her voice was unrecognizable. The camp was scattering. Women were grabbing children and running for the northern fissures. The elders were already moving. Taza stood frozen. He looked at his people fleeing to safety. He looked at May being dragged up the ridge. He looked at Clara, who was ready to charge a regiment of cavalry with a single rifle. The old man grabbed Taza's arm. Come, we must go. The girl is gone. Taza, leave her. If you fight, you bring the soldiers down on the families. Come. Taza looked at the old man. He looked at the family he had tried to protect his whole life. Then he looked at Clara. He saw the woman who had held him in the dark. He saw the fierce, terrifying love in her eyes. If he left May, he saved his standing with his people. If he left May, he survived. But he would not be a man. He would be a ghost. Taza shook off the old man's hand. Take the families north, Taza ordered. Go to the high ice. They cannot follow. And you? The old man asked. I go to get my heart back, Taza said. He turned to Clara. Can you ride? He asked. I can ride anything, Clara said. Taza whistled. A pinto pony, wiry and mean, broke from the herd. Taza grabbed a second horse, a roan mare, by the mane. We do not run, Taza said, swinging onto the pinto's back. We attack! Ruth! Clara yelled. Get on! Ruth scrambled up behind Clara on the roan. She wrapped her arms around Clara's waist, burying her face in Clara's coat. They have her at the command post, Taza said, pointing to the ridge where the black coat of the agent was visible through the trees. They will think we are fleeing. They will not expect us to come up the throat of the dragon. Clara checked the load in her rifle. She felt the heavy, devastating weight of the decision. They were 3 people against an army. It was madness. It was death. But as she looked at Taza, sitting tall on his horse, his knife in his hand and his eyes burning with a lethal resolve, she knew she would rather die on that ridge than live another day running. For May, Clara said. For us, Taza said. He kicked his horse. The animal surged forward, not away from the guns, but toward them. Clara followed, the wind tearing at her hair, riding into the violence of a love that had finally decided to fight back. The raid on the ridge was not a battle. It was a collision of desperation and steel. Taza rode the pinto pony like a demon, cutting through the scrub oak with a ferocity that scattered the first line of soldiers. He did not fire his rifle. He used the horse as a weapon, slamming into the flank of the formation, creating a chaotic fracture in their discipline. Clara, clinging to the roan mare with Ruth behind her, rode into the gap Taza opened. She saw May. 2 soldiers were dragging her toward a supply wagon, her heels digging useless furrows in the snow. A man in a heavy black coat, Hurst, the Indian agent, stood by the wagon, shouting orders, his face twisted in irritation rather than fear. Get her! Taza roared, wheeling his pony to block a trooper who was raising a carbine. Clara did not hesitate. She spurred the mare, driving the animal straight at the men holding May. She raised the rifle Taza had given her. Not to shoot, but to strike. She swung the barrel like a club, catching one soldier on the shoulder. He yelled and let go. "May!" Clara screamed. May scrambled up, her face bloody, her eyes wild. She lunged for the stirrup of the roan. Ruth reached down, grabbing May's wrist, pulling with a strength born of pure terror. May swung up behind Ruth, the mare stumbling under the weight of 3 women. "Go!" Taza shouted. He fired his pistol now, 3 quick shots that sent the soldiers diving for cover. They turned the horses toward the timberline, the hooves slipping on the icy rock. They were escaping. They were free. Then the cost came due. A single shot rang out, distinct from the chaotic popping of the army carbines. It was a sharp, heavy crack from a buffalo gun. Taza's pinto jerked mid-stride, its front legs buckling. Taza was thrown clear, rolling into the snow. He was up in an instant, but the horse lay thrashing, a spray of bright arterial blood painting the white ground. The pinto was not just a mount, it carried their last water skins, their ammunition, and the heavier blankets. "Taza!" Clara screamed, hauling on the reins of the roan. Taza sprinted toward them, bullets kicking up snow at his heels. He vaulted onto the back of the roan, behind May. The mare groaned, her sides heaving, but she did not quit. She carried 4 people into the dense tree cover, away from the ridge, away from the death that snapped at their heels. They rode until the mare could not take another step. They collapsed in a ravine miles from the ambush site, the silence of the winter forest heavy and suffocating. They were alive, but they had nothing. No food, no blankets, no water. Just the clothes on their backs, the ledger May had kept stuffed in her shirt, and one exhausted horse that stood with its head hanging low, steam rising from its coat. Taza walked a few paces away and leaned against a pine tree. He looked back toward the ridge. His face was a mask of grief. "We lost the supplies," Clara said, her voice hollow. "We lost more," Taza said. He looked at his hands. The pinto had been a gift from the old man who led the band. By losing the horse, by drawing the soldiers, Taza had severed the last tie to his people. He had brought fire to the canyon to save the sisters. He was truly alone now. May sat in the snow, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead. She pulled the ledger from her shirt. It was bent, but the pages were dry. "We have this," May said. Her voice was brittle. Taza looked at the book. "It is paper. It does not stop the cold. It stops the lie," Clara said. She walked over to May and took the book. She opened it. The handwriting was precise, bureaucratic. It detailed the sale of human beings as if they were sacks of grain. It listed the sheriff. It listed Hearst. It listed the bribes paid to a judge in San Miguel. "San Miguel," Clara said, reading the name. "It is a mining town, 2 days' ride east. It is a nest of snakes," Taza said. "Hearst has friends there. The sheriff goes there to drink." "Good," Clara said. She looked up, and for the first time her eyes held no panic, only a cold, crystalline resolve. "If they are there, then we go there." Taza stared at her. "Clara, we have no ammunition. We have no food. If we go to San Miguel, they will hang us before we cross the street. They will try," Clara said. She closed the ledger with a snap. "But I am done running, Taza. I am done hiding in caves and freezing while men like Hearst sleep in feather beds. We are going to San Miguel, and we are going to burn their world down with the truth." The journey to San Miguel was a blur of misery. They walked to spare the horse, taking turns riding only when their legs refused to move. They ate snow to quench their thirst. They huddled together at night in drifts, sharing body heat like a pack of wolves, shivering until their teeth ached. When they finally saw the smoke of the town rising against the gray sky, they looked like specters. Their clothes were rags. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken and dark. "We cannot walk in like this," Ruth whispered. "They will shoot us on sight." Taza stopped. He looked at the town, then at Clara. "I stay here," he said. Clara spun around. "What?" I am the target, Taza said. The posters say I am the killer. If I walk in with you, the panic starts. Men will shoot. You take the book. You find the federal marshal. I will wait in the rocks. No, Clara said. Taza's jaw tightened. Clara, use your head. A white woman with a book is a witness. A white woman with an Apache is a traitor. You have a better chance without me. Clara walked up to him. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough, cold, and scarred. I do not want a chance without you, she said. She squeezed his hand. Hard. They said you kidnapped us. They said you are a savage who butchered a shopkeeper. If you stay in the rocks, you prove them right. You prove that you are something that belongs in the dark. She stepped closer, invading his space, ignoring May and Ruth, who watched with wide eyes. Walk with me, Clara said. Walk beside me. Let them see you. Let them see that you did not take us. Let them see that we chose you. Taza looked down at her. The fear in his eyes was gone, replaced by a terrified wonder. He had faced cavalry charges and bear attacks, but this woman, standing in the snow and demanding he claim his place in the world, scared him more than any of it. They will kill me. Clara, he said softly. Then they will have to kill me first, she answered. She turned to her sisters. May, Ruth, we walk down the main street. We do not run. We do not hide. We go to the courthouse. And if the sheriff is there, May asked, checking the weight of the rock in her pocket. Then we smile, Clara said grimly, and we tell the truth. They entered San Miguel at noon. The town was busy. Miners in muddy boots, merchants in wagons, women in bonnets carrying baskets. The noise of commerce was loud, the clang of the smithy, the shout of drivers. But as the group walked down the center of the muddy thoroughfare, the noise died. It rippled outward like a wave. Silence. Heads turned. People stopped in their tracks. They saw 3 white women, ragged and fierce, walking in a phalanx. And in the center, walking with his head high, was Taza. He wore no war paint. He carried his rifle across his back, not in his hands. He walked with a dignity that made the miners step back onto the boardwalks. Clara felt the eyes of the town on them. She felt the judgment, the shock, the whispers starting. That's the Miller girls. That's the Indian. She did not flinch. She kept her hand lightly on Taza's arm, a touch that screamed possession. He is with me, the touch said. He is ours. They reached the steps of the courthouse, a brick building that stood as a symbol of order in the chaos of the frontier. A door banged open across the street. Sheriff Pale stepped out of the saloon, wiping foam from his mustache. He froze. Behind him, Agent Hurst emerged, buttoning his coat against the cold. Well now, the sheriff said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence of the street. He stepped off the boardwalk, his hand dropping to the heavy Colt on his hip. The devil comes home to roost. He signaled to his deputies, who were loitering on the porch. Surround them. Men with shotguns moved to block the street. The crowd pressed in, sensing blood. You have a lot of gall. Coming here, Pale sneered. Walking closer. Or maybe you are just stupid. You are under arrest. Taza, for the murder of Elias Thorne, and for the abduction of these girls. He looked at Clara, his eyes cold and dead. Step away from him. Clara, it is over. We will get you a bath and a hot meal. You are safe now. Clara did not step away. She stepped forward. We were never abducted. Sheriff, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. It cut through the cold air like a bell. Pale laughed, a nervous sound. You are confused. Darlin', the Stockholm Syndrome has got you. This buck has twisted your mind. The only thing that has been twisted is the truth, May called out. She stepped up beside Clara, pulling the ledger from her jacket. She held it up high. We have the book. Pyle, May shouted. We have the names. Pale's face went the color of ash. He looked at Hurst. Hurst's eyes narrowed into slits. That is stolen government property. Hurst barked, stepping forward. Seize it! Deputies surged forward. No! Ruth screamed. She was the smallest, the quietest, but she stepped in front of May, her arms spread wide. You will not touch it. Read the names, read the date of December 12th. The crowd muttered. December 12th? That was when the Johnson girl went missing. Pale saw the mood shifting. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the townspeople. He knew he had to end it. Now. He is a killer, Pale shouted, pointing at Taza. He is reaching for a gun. Drop him! Pale drew his revolver. It was a lie. Taza's hands were empty, hanging at his sides, but the deputies raised their shotguns. Clara moved. She did not think. She threw herself in front of Taza, shielding his body with her own. Shoot then, she screamed. Shoot me! The deputies hesitated. They could shoot an Apache. They could not shoot a white woman in the middle of Main Street with half the town watching. Pale did not hesitate. He raised his gun, aiming over Clara's shoulder at Taza's head. Taza moved. He did not draw a weapon. He did not strike. He simply stepped sideways, calm and fluid, moving Clara gently out of the line of fire with one hand while stepping toward the sheriff with the other. Pale fired. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Taza's coat, grazing his arm. Taza did not stop. He closed the distance in 2 strides. He caught Pale's wrist in a grip that could crush stone. He twisted. There was a snap of bone, and Pale screamed, dropping the gun. Taza swept the sheriff's legs out from under him. Pale hit the mud hard. Taza stood over him. The crowd gasped. They waited for the knife. They waited for the savage act that would justify their hate. Taza looked down at the man who had sold the sisters. He looked at the neck exposed above the collar. He could end it. He could tear the life out of this man and feel the satisfaction of it. But he heard Clara's voice in his head. Let them see you. Taza stepped back. He kicked the gun away. I am not the animal, Taza said into the silence. You are. He looked at the deputies. Arrest him. The deputies looked at their sheriff, writhing in the mud with a broken wrist. They looked at the ledger May was holding. They looked at Taza, who had spared a life he had every right to take. Agent Hurst saw the tide turning. He spun around, sprinting for his horse tied at the rail. He is running, May shouted. Clara grabbed the sheriff's dropped revolver from the mud. She was not a gunfighter. She was a woman who had been pushed too far. She raised the heavy iron with both hands. She didn't aim for the man. She aimed for the horse. She pulled the trigger. The gun bucked in her hands. The bullet struck the dirt in front of Hurst's horse. The animal reared, terrified. Hurst lost his grip and fell backward, landing heavily in a horse trough. He sputtered, wet and foolish, thrashing in the icy water. Ruth ran to the nearest man on the boardwalk, a tall man in a suit who looked important. You are the judge? Ruth demanded, grabbing his coat. Judge Holloway. I am, the man stammered, looking at the chaos. Take the book, Ruth said, shoving the ledger into his chest. Read it, or we will read it to the newspaper man standing right there. She pointed to a man with a notepad who was scribbling furiously. Judge Holloway looked at the sheriff groaning in the mud. He looked at Hurst dripping wet and being corralled by miners who had heard the accusations. He looked at the ledger. Deputies, Holloway boomed, his voice shaking but authoritative. Take Sheriff Pale into custody. And Mr. Hurst. On what charge? A deputy asked. Bewildered. Trafficking, Clara said, lowering the gun. Corruption. An attempted murder. The sun was setting by the time the chaos settled. Pale and Hurst were in the jail cells, guarded by men the judge had deputized from the crowd. The ledger was locked in the judge's safe. The town square was empty now, save for the sisters and Taza. They sat on the steps of the courthouse. The adrenaline was fading, leaving them shaking and cold. It is done, May whispered. She leaned her head on Clara's shoulder. We did it. Clara looked at her hands. They were still stained with the mud from the street. It is not done, Taza said. He was standing a few feet away, watching the shadows lengthen. He looked at the windows of the town. People were watching. They arrested the sheriff. Clara said, yes, Taza said, but the sheriff has friends. The agent has friends in Washington. And the town, they saw an Apache humiliate a white man. They will not forgive that. He looked at Clara. You are safe now. The judge will protect you. You are heroes. And you? Clara asked. I am still an Indian, Taza said. He turned to walk away, toward the edge of town where the darkness waited. Clara stood up. "Where are you going?" "To the mountains," Taza said, "before the sun rises and the hate wakes up." Clara ran down the steps. She caught up to him in the middle of the street. "Take me with you," she said. Taza stopped. He looked at her, his face pained. "Clara, you fought for a home. You fought to be safe. You have that now. You can live here. You can be normal." "Normal?" Clara laughed, a sound that was half sob. "Normal is a town that watched us starve for years. Normal is a sheriff who sells girls. I do not want normal." "Taza," she reached out and touched his chest, over the heart that beat beneath the buckskin. "I want real. You are the only real thing I have found." Taza covered her hand with his. "I have nothing. Clara, I have no horse. I have no tribe. I have a price on my head that will never go away." "I don't care about the price," Clara said fiercely. "We will build a house where they can't find us. We will plant corn in the rocks if we have to. But I am not staying here without you." Taza looked at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw the love that was stronger than her fear. He realized then that he could not leave her, not because she needed him, but because he needed her. She was the anchor that kept him from drifting away into the ghost world. He nodded slowly. "We go north," he said, "past the snow line." May and Ruth were standing on the steps. Clara looked back at them. May walked down, followed by Ruth. "We are coming," May said. Taza looked at the three of them, the fierce one, the soft one, and the one who held them all together. "You cannot live in the snow," Taza warned. "Teach us," Ruth said. Taza looked at the sisters. A small smile, rare and fleeting, touched his lips. "Get horses," he said. They stole 3 horses from the corral behind the sheriff's office. It felt like justice. They rode out of San Miguel under the cover of darkness. They left behind the town, the law, and the safety that had nearly killed them. As they reached the first ridge, Clara looked back. The lights of the town were small and yellow, flickering against the vast blackness of the territory. She felt a pang of fear for what lay ahead, the cold, the hunger, the constant looking over her shoulder. The sheriff might be in jail, but his partners would come. The army would come. The world would not forgive them for winning. But then she looked beside her. Taza was riding close, his leg brushing hers. He reached out and took her hand in the dark. Clara squeezed back. She wasn't safe. She wasn't clean, but for the first time in her life, she was free. They turned their horses toward the high country, where the wind howled and the snow was deep, and they began the long, hard work of building a life that belonged only to them. The victory at San Miguel did not taste like sweet wine. It tasted like cold ash and iron. The adrenaline that had carried Clara, May, and Ruth through the snow and the gunfire faded, leaving behind a profound and aching hollowness. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget, and for weeks after the arrest of Sheriff Pale and Agent Hurst, the sisters woke screaming. They flinched at the sound of a door slamming. They ate their food with the frantic speed of starving dogs, protecting their plates with curved arms. They were housed in a small, drafty boarding house on the edge of town, paid for by the federal court while the investigation dragged its heavy feet. The town of San Miguel did not celebrate them. The people had seen the truth. The ledgers, the weeping girls found in the mine wagons, the corruption that rotted their law. But they resented the mirror. They resented that 3 ragged girls and an Apache warrior were the ones to hold it up. Winter settled in with a brutality that froze the water in the pitchers inside the room. The snow piled against the windows, sealing them in a white tomb. The legal reckoning was a slow, grinding machine. Judge Holloway was a decent man, but he was a creature of statutes and precedents, and the men who defended Hurst were creatures of venom. Clara and May were called to the makeshift courtroom in the saloon almost daily. They sat on hard wooden chairs, their hands clasped until the knuckles turned white, while a lawyer from Tucson, a man with slick hair and a suit that cost more than a ranch, tried to tear them apart. "Is it not true?" "Miss Miller," the lawyer asked, pacing in front of Clara, that you invited the accused savage into your camp, that you traveled with him willingly. He saved our lives, Clara answered, her voice steady though her stomach churned. Saved you? The lawyer smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Or did he simply steal you from one master to serve himself? A woman of virtue would have sought the nearest town. You went into the mountains. You slept in his bedding. Are we to believe that nothing untoward happened in those long, dark nights? The insinuation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The men in the gallery murmured. They looked at Clara not as a victim, but as spoiled goods. A woman who had laid with an Indian was, in their eyes, something less than human. May stood up, knocking her chair back. You dirty son of a bitch, she shouted. Sit down, the bailiff roared. Clara reached up and pulled May back down. She looked the lawyer in the eye. Believe what you want, Clara said. Your belief does not change the truth. Agent Hurst sold women. Sheriff Pyle took the money. And Taza is a better man than any of you. The lawyer sneered. That remains to be seen. Taza was not allowed in the courtroom. He waited outside, leaning against the hitching post in the freezing wind, wrapping his buffalo coat tight. He was a statue of patience. But Clara saw the tension in his jaw. He was watching the rooftops, watching the alleys. He knew that a piece of paper from a judge did not stop a bullet. He faced danger from every side. The miners spat when they passed him. The local deputies, forced to leave him be by the judge's order, fingered their triggers and whispered slurs. But the danger was not just from the whites. One evening, as Clara and Taza walked back to the boarding house, a shadow detached itself from the alleyway. It was an Apache rider, sitting on a lean gray horse. He did not carry a weapon in his hand, but his presence was a threat. Taza stopped. He spoke a few words in his own tongue. The rider looked at Taza, then at Clara. His expression was one of profound disappointment. He said something sharp, a single sentence that sounded like a stone cracking, and then turned his horse and vanished into the dusk. What did he say? Clara asked. Shivering, he said, I am dead. Taza replied quietly. He said, I have walked into the fire and I can never come back to the cool water. He meant you are exiled. Clara realized. I was exiled a long time ago. Taza said, now, I am just forgotten. He looked at her. It is a dangerous thing. Clara, to be nothing. You are not nothing, Clara said fiercely. To them, I am, and to your people, I am a monster. I stand in the middle of the river, and both banks are burning. Despite the bleakness, there were glimmers of light. They were small, like candles in a cavern, but they kept the sisters from breaking. A federal marshal named Davies arrived from Tucson to oversee the prisoner transfer. He was a hard man with a face like a dried apple, but he tipped his hat to Clara and called her ma'am. He refused the cigars offered by the defense lawyers. He sat with the sisters and took their statements with a quiet respect that made Ruth cry. You did a brave thing, Davies told them. A hard thing. Most men would have broken. And there was Mrs. Gable, the widow who ran the bakery. When the town grocer refused to sell to Clara, claiming he was out of stock, Mrs. Gable knocked on the boarding house door after dark. She held a basket covered with a cloth, fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and a small sack of coffee. My daughter is 12. Mrs. Gable whispered, pressing the basket into Ruth's hands. Just take it, please. And there was the boy, a street urchin, no older than 8, who found Taza cleaning his rifle on the porch. The boy didn't run. He walked up and touched the fringe of Taza's leggings. Are you a chief? The boy asked. No, Taza said. Just a man. My PA says you are a tiger. The boy said. Taza looked at the boy, his dark eyes softening. Tigers are in books. I'm just cold. The boy smiled and handed Taza a marble, a swirl of blue glass. Keep it, the boy said, for luck. Taza kept it. He carried it in his pocket next to his cartridges. As the weeks turned into months, the trial concluded. Hurst was sentenced to 20 years in Yuma. Pale was given 15. It was justice, of a sort, though it felt small compared to the terror they had endured. But the end of the trial meant the end of their protection. Judge Holloway called them into his chambers. "The trial is over," he said, shuffling papers. "The federal funds for your housing end on Friday. And I must be honest with you. San Miguel is not a place where you will thrive. There is too much history here, too much bad blood." "We know," Clara said. "You should go to St. Louis," the judge suggested. "Or Denver. Start over where no one knows the name Miller." "We are not going to a city," Clara said. "We are done with cities." She walked out of the courthouse and found Taza. He was watching the mountains to the north, where the snow was beginning to recede, revealing the dark iron of the rock. "We have to choose," Clara said. "I have chosen." Taza said, "I stay with you." "No," Clara said. "I mean we have to choose where we live. We cannot stay here. They will burn us out in a month." "There is a place," Taza said. 3 days' ride north. Lost Creek. There is water even in the drought. The wind is blocked by the canyon wall. It is hard country. The soil is rocky. Is it empty?" Clara asked. "It is empty because it is hard." Taza said, "No one wants it." "Then we want it." Clara said, "They use the reward money, $500 for the capture of the traffickers, paid grudgingly by the territory, to buy a wagon, 2 mules, and supplies. They bought saws, hammers, nails, sacks of seed, and a new rifle for May. The departure was not a parade. They left at dawn, the wagon wheels creaking in the frozen mud. No one came to wave goodbye. Ruth did not come with them. It had been the hardest conversation of Clara's life. Ruth, the sister she had protected, the baby she had carried through the desert, had found her own steel. She had spent the winter helping the local doctor, a drunkard with shaking hands but a brilliant mind. Ruth had cleaned his instruments, boiled his bandages, and learned to stitch flesh. "I have to stay." "Clara," Ruth had said, standing in the empty room of the boarding house. "Doctor, Aris is going to teach me. He says I have the hands for it. He is a drunk," May had argued. "He is a healer," Ruth said softly. "And I need to heal things. I can't carry a gun like you, May, and I can't build a fortress like Clara. I need to fix what is broken." Clara had held her sister for a long time, feeling the thin ribs, the strength that was finally emerging. "You are not safe here," Clara whispered. "I'm not afraid anymore," Ruth answered. "I will come to Lost Creek in the summer, when the pass is clear, but this is my path." So the wagon rolled out with only Clara, May, and Taza. They built the homestead with their own hands. Lost Creek was a slash of green in a landscape of brown and gray. Taza was right. The soil was rocky, and the work was back-breaking. For 3 months, they lived in a canvas tent while they felled trees and dragged stones. May became the guardian. She did not take to the plow or the hammer. She took to the perimeter. She hunted for their meat, bringing down elk and turkey. She patrolled the ridgeline, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She wore her hair cut short like a boy, and she moved with a dangerous, prowling grace. The rage that had once consumed her had cooled into a tempered purpose. She was the wall that kept the world out. Clara and Taza built the house. It was slow work. They notched the logs one by one. They mixed the mud for the chinking. They lifted the heavy beams of the roof together, straining until their muscles trembled. In the work, their bond deepened into something that needed no words. There was no priest to marry them. No church would have opened its doors to them anyway. But one evening, as the roof was finally finished and the first fire was crackling in the stone hearth, Clara took Taza's hand. She led him to the doorway. The sun was setting, painting the canyon in violent shades of violet and orange. "I choose you," Clara said, "not for a day. Not until the winter ends. I choose you for the life." Taza looked at her. He had tied his hair back with a strip of leather. His hands were calloused from the axe handle. "I have nothing to give you, Clara. No name, no land that the law recognizes. You give me this," Clara said, gesturing to the house, to the fire, to the vast silence around them. "You give me peace. I vow to you," Taza said, his voice rough. "I stand between you and the dark. As long as I have breath." It was a marriage of earth and blood. They sealed it not with a ring, but with a quiet, desperate embrace in the twilight, holding each other against the encroaching night. That night, in the bed they had built of pine boughs and firs, the intimacy was absolute. It was not the frantic fumbling of their first time in the snow. It was a slow, deliberate mapping of one another. Clara learned the map of his scars. Taza learned the rhythm of her breathing. They loved with the intensity of people who knew exactly how fragile life was. Every touch was a rebellion against the death that had chased them. But the world does not forget. Spring brought the thaw, and the thaw brought the road. Lost Creek was isolated, but it was near an old drover's trail. 6 months after they settled, the threat arrived. It was not the law. It was worse. It was the Vigilance Committee. 6 men from a town 50 miles south, men who had heard the stories of the white women living with a savage. They came riding up the creek bed, their dusters long, their hats pulled low. They were men who believed they were doing God's work by punishing what they did not understand. May saw them first. She came running down from the ridge, breathless. "Riders," she said, "6, armed. They are not passing through. They are spreading out." Clara was in the garden, hoeing the rocky earth. Taza was by the corral, breaking a wild mustang he had caught. They gathered on the porch of the cabin. "Do we run?" May asked, checking the load in her Winchester. "No," Taza said. He picked up his rifle. "If we run, we never stop. This is our ground." Clara went inside and came out with a shotgun. She stood beside Taza. She felt the fear, cold and familiar, but it did not paralyze her. It sharpened her. The riders stopped 20 yards from the porch. The leader was a big man with a beard that reached his chest. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "We heard there was a situation up here," the man said, his eyes sliding over Clara and resting on Taza with pure hatred. "We heard there were white women held captive by a buck. We came to liberate you, ma'am." Clara stepped forward to the edge of the porch. She racked the slide of the shotgun. The sound was loud in the silence. "I am not a captive," Clara said loudly. "This is my husband, and this is our land. Turn around." The man laughed. "Husband? There ain't no law that marries a white woman to a dog. You are confused. Lady, we are doing you a favor. We are going to hang him. And then we are going to take you back to decent folk." He reached for his pistol. "Don't," Taza warned. The violence was short and brutal. The leader drew. May, hidden behind the water barrel at the corner of the house, fired first. Her bullet struck the dirt inches from the leader's horse, causing it to rear. Taza fired. His shot took the hat off the second man, spinning him around in the saddle. Clara leveled the shotgun at the leader, who was fighting his horse. "The next one takes your head off," she screamed. "Get out!" The men looked at the house. They saw the fortifications. They saw the crossfire. They saw a woman with a shotgun who looked like she would pull the trigger and sleep soundly afterward. They were bullies, and like all bullies, they wanted easy prey. They did not want a war. "You are going to hell, woman," the leader shouted, wrestling his horse around. "You are damning your soul." "My soul is my own business," Clara shouted back. The men turned and galloped away, retreating down the creek bed, defeated not by numbers, but by the ferocity of the resistance. Clara lowered the gun. Her hands were shaking, but she did not drop the weapon. Taza stepped up beside her. He put his hand on her shoulder. "They will talk," Taza said. "Others might come. Let them come," Clara said. She looked at the garden, at the cabin, at May, who was standing tall and proud by the water barrel. "This is ours. Taza, we earned it." Summer brought the heat, and it brought a visitor. A small buggy came rattling up the trail. It was Ruth. She looked older, tired, but her eyes were clear. She wore a simple gray dress and carried a bag of medical supplies. She climbed down and ran to them. The reunion was tearful. A tangle of arms and laughter on the porch. "I finished my training," Ruth said, drinking a cup of cool water from their well. "Doctor, Aris died last month. He left me his books. I'm going to ride the circuit. There are families out here, ranchers, miners, even Apache bands, who have no one. I'm going to help them." "You're safe?" Clara asked. touching Ruth's face. "I am useful," Ruth said, "and that makes me safe enough." That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun went down. The wind howled through the canyon, a lonely, wild sound. The life they had chosen was hard. Their hands were rough, their backs ached, and they slept with guns within reach. They were outcasts, living on the fringe of a society that would never accept them. But as Clara looked around, she saw the truth of it. May was sharpening her knife, content in her role as protector. Ruth was reading a medical text by the lantern light, finding purpose in healing the wounds of the world. And Taza was sitting on the step, whittling a toy horse for a child that did not exist yet, but might one day. He looked up and caught Clara's eye. He didn't smile, but his face was open, the guarded mask gone. He looked at her with a profound, steady love that anchored her to the earth. Clara moved to sit beside him. She leaned her head on his shoulder. The wind bit at her cheeks, but she was not cold. "Is it enough?" Taza asked quietly, gesturing to the dark emptiness of the canyon. Clara took his hand, interlacing their fingers. She listened to the beat of his heart and the howl of the wind. "It is everything," she said. They sat together in the dark, watching the stars wheel overhead. Free from the cage of the town, free from the chains of the past. They were scarred, they were weary, and they were hunted, but they were together. And in the wild, unforgiving heart of the West, that was the only victory that mattered. Thank you for journeying with me through the dust, the blood, and the enduring hope of Clara, Taza, May, and Ruth. It has been a privilege to bring this story of survival and defiance to life for you. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening or reading from today? Does the resilience of the Miller sisters resonate with you? Please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories that dig beneath the myth to find the human heart of the frontier. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. Until the next trail, your novelist.